with it then.
Yeah.
You're nice though.
That was the first thing I noticed when I came to church. I walked in the back door. I don't remember who I was with. Was I with you? Was I really?
Yeah.
And I looked at that and I realized that there was something about this church that was different because everybody else puts a cross there, right?
Yes, they do.
Everybody. And they put a dove. And that was something about that just made me pause.
John Hawkins from the
I'm sorry?
John Hawkins.
I did.
From the
I did. I did like that, but I walked a little longer, right? I'm going to walk together, that's a good point. But yeah, just something about just click.
Yeah, I get that all the time.
Teresa, well, he's at his doctor's, so she had to go to Israel today. And I think I'll do it today. You go from one extreme age to just. Yes. But here, babies. It's all babysitting. It's all babysitting. He slept a lot. Everybody's tired. We're not. He's doing a study on places in the Bible. And he's going to be talking about Carol later, I guess. It's yeah, he talked about Jerusalem last week in the temple and
Yeah.
Mount Olives. He showed me pictures from this trip.
Yeah, that's interesting. He showed us a few. You want to swap?
I'll just keep walking down here.
Share. You two can swap.
So we just put this. You're done. Is it hot? Okay, and
Is it
so,
hot in here or is it just me?
it's actually been going really.
Are you hot?
Yeah, any of these that exist.
Yeah, but I don't ever try to weigh in on that one way or the other.
I'm going to do this one because it won't.
So.
Yeah.
You can come sit here with me sometime.
That's all right.
About
I don't want to be in a hot
friends.
spot.
I told some of the guys I went to the thing with, like one was Anglican Catholic. There's a thing. They're not Catholic enough to be Catholic, not Anglican enough to be Anglican, so they're in the middle.
Yeah.
And apparently, it's kind of cool. But anyway, he wore a robe, and some of the other Anglicans wore a robe, because Catholics, whatever. And I was like, yeah, I used to burn up. I said, then I put a fan below me, and I went like that. None of it never blew their minds that was a thing. He goes, that's brilliant. I was like, yeah, does it make your robe fluff up? I was like, no, there's not like an industrial fan. It's just a little box fan, you know.
Yeah.
They were all just amazed. Leave it to the Presbyterian. Leave to the Presbyterians. I'm gonna have these heaters and air conditioners fighting against each other.
Could be. They did a whole week, I think.
But I'm not.
I'm gonna have them fight against each other for a little while.
Is
Is it that time? I don't know.
That probably
It is that time.
are usually
That's about it. You didn't say anything. I let you.
All right, y'all ready? You ready? You sure? Yep. As long as you are, man. Alex is the bomb, y'all. He's up here, supposed to come record with me today instead. He helps me do research for this instead, and is doing our devotionals and doing this. Thanks, dude. Very much. Doris, would you mind praying for us? Awesome.
Oh, gracious Lord, mighty Father, we thank you for bringing us together, church family, to learn about the word, how we to live our lives. Please guide us, teach us what we need to do to be in the will of you. We know that you teach us through your word. Let our ears and eyes be open to your lessons, Father. Thank you very much. Amen.
Amen. That's what you do when you pray right there.
What happened to the other people?
Thank you. Huh?
Where's Jerry?
I mean, she's around somewhere. We good?
Everybody's here, right?
Yeah. Leo, he said he'd be right back. Testing. Waiting. Patient. I didn't finish this till the last minute, so I still got my terrible clicker.
Oh, no.
It's not my good one. See, it's got the little. That was much better. Maybe if I use both though. Hold on.
Oh, I see it. Well, I can see both of them.
If I do both of them, it's okay?
I can see. What's the worst I can see?
I meant to get one with a bigger dot because that was tiny, man. Once I shake so bad, you gotta chase it over the screen.
Part of it is your distance, you were closer to it up there.
Was it better? I may step closer to it, see that helps. It's also called the Mauser shakes because the whole Mauser stuff, none of us could be surgeons, like none of us. We're all the whole bunch of what's that?
I'm glad you recognized that.
You're right. All of us just shake crazy. And I didn't know it. And I said something about being shaky. She said, oh, that's Mauser shakes. I read that side. They said, they all do. I came by it honest. How we doing? Oh, we're good? Okay, which camera am I on?
Who knows?
We're good. Thank y'all for joining us to do this. And tonight we are going to center around Galilee mostly, just kind of look at what that area looks like and read a few stories about the area and just allow that to be the place that we exist. So we're going to be just we're going to look at it. This is how we're going to start it off. Let's reorient ourselves on the size of area that we're talking about, if we can. So, you ready? So this is 1st century Roman Empire. This is what it looked like. So, Jesus time, right? Britain has not been taken yet. Give it a couple more decades, and that'll get mostly taken, for the southern part anyway. But it was massive. I mean, like, how many people you figure? 60, 65 million? That's what I'm reading. Within the Roman Empire, it was. Imagine what has to happen to get that kind of empire always rolling, right? The resources that it takes to keep that thing moving. So 97% of people in this area made the stuff. 95 to 97. About 3 to 5% consumed it, for the most part. And you were shown by how big festivals you had, and if you had really big festivals, you could get favor from Caesar, and this is how the whole thing worked. And by doing that, they created a vast empire. just for reference sake, when Paul went to, like, the letter of the Galatians, that's in this area, modern day Turkey, over here. We're talking about Judea here. That's the area we're talking about. So this is where Paul spent most of his time, was in this area, thereabouts. If you drove it today, 6,079 kilometers. I don't know how far that is. I forgot to change it to miles before I did this slide. But you would drive for 61 hours. It would be a fascinating drive. That would be from east to west. Modern day, right? This is modern. 61 hours. To walk it, 1,347 hours. It's 4,000 miles, by the way. I figured out for that one. You have to understand, this is a day when they had horses and ships that sailed one direction, right? With the predominant winds. And there was another route that went south. I decided not to take that one. It ran through like the length of Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, and Egypt. And I figured we would stay out in the desert on our trip. Narrow it down. That's the area we're talking about. This is, just to orient ourselves, we recognize where we are, but this is Babylon, this is modern day Iraq, right? That is where the Babylonians were. When they talk about going to Babylonian exile, that's what we're talking about. They're talking about taking from Jerusalem to Babylon, right? This area is Syria, is right here. Tyre and Sidon, that area that's a little bit away that we talked about, is up here. Jerusalem here, Egypt in this area, right? Assyria is up in here. And so that's the lay of the land. Now, these are the roads of that time. The red one is called the King's Highway. And obviously a major road. But it was limited in the direction it was going, right? If you were going that direction, you could go through there. But it's not an easy travel. You're going through the desert a little bit in places. Then the brown roads were roads of the Roman time, but a lot of ship lines as well. But see the violet road, it's kind of hard to see, but it runs from Memphis up this way and it cuts over right here. Do you see this? This road? That's the what do I call it? The Via Maris, the Way of the Sea, the Way of the Philistines. When you've heard of the Philistines were in this area right here. That's the area they occupied. So it was the Way of the Philistines, the International Trunk Road. It's been many different names. It was a major trade route. If you were going to go and didn't want to go through the desert as much, if you wanted to go Syria and on into that direction, you take it. If you want to go into Europe and around, you take it that direction. Like you can go wherever you want to because it hooks up, watch, with the King's Road right there. So you can go wherever you want to. And it was an incredibly major thoroughfare. And here's the interesting part about it. Do you see what it runs beside right here? That's the Sea of Galilee, right? And so we talk about the Sea of Galilee being remote. It had a major thoroughfare that ran right through the middle of it, which means there were different peoples coming through, right? There was wealth. There's only wealth where there's a trade route. It just is. Some of these things are going to happen. Let's narrow down the area a little bit more. It's really close up, right? Jerusalem, Megiddo, we talked about that. Overlooking the Jezreel Valley, which is here. This is the Sea of Galilee. This is the Dead Sea. Masada is here. Egypt, Syria. Damascus is an 8-minute flight nowadays. So, kind of right there. This is how the roads looked of that day. And the blue road is the way of the patriarchs. That's the one that Abraham rode, the Jacob rode. That's the road of the patriarchs, right? And so, as you can see, while it was remote, you could get around. And the King's Highway and such things are big enough you can have chariots and stuff on them. And the VMRs too. You can have chariots on these, man. Like, they're big roads. And the roads were fantastic. Our roads don't last 2 winters. Their roads are still there. pretty solid, right? That Via Maris ran through the Jezreel Valley, Megiddo, Tiberias, which is on the Sea of Galilee, but it was unclean. Not allowed to. Jews were allowed to go there. Capernaum, the Golan Heights, Damascus, and then the King's Highway, and it went wherever you wanted to go from there. So this was an area that collected a lot of people, but if you're from there, you're just kind of from there. Everybody knows everybody, right? It's little villages. Is there another one here? Yeah, okay, so here. Here's the area we're talking about. So you have Nazareth. Nazareth is here, where they came back to right after Jesus was born. They went to Egypt. There's Cana, so that wasn't far away. Tiberias, Magdala, where Mary Magdalene was from. Gennesaret, we'll talk about that. Capernaum, Chorazin, we'll talk about that. There's a town over here we'll talk about in a minute that we don't talk about quite yet. That valley is here. So that valley is just sets this little area off, and it just is sort of within itself, right? All right. This is where Jesus began his teachings. This is the spot. And one of the things he taught was obviously the Sermon on the Mount. There's a spot just right there outside of Capernaum, right? The whole bit. Let's look at this. Nazareth, Cana, spelled differently, Capernaum. Oh, how far do y'all think that is? Let's play a game. How far do you think it is? From Nazareth to Capernaum, how long the trip? How long do you think it'd take to walk or drive, or how many miles? I don't care. What do you think?
15 miles. That's a guess.
30.
Okay.
Not far. Not far, yeah. So what's that? Williamson County? Not even?
It takes a long time to get to Fairview.
It's a long time to get to Fairview, yeah. That's about a 45-minute drive. Or, I did it again, 8.5 hours of walking. I have a sneaking suspicion they walked faster than us. I'm just guessing out loud. I bet they walked everywhere. I bet they didn't have to take any breaks. And I bet they got a gate and they had a staff and they were. You know, I had to try to keep up with some homeless people in this world, y'all. They start walking, try to keep up. There's a guy named Jerry that would run your pants off. He walks so fast everywhere because I always walk. This is what that area looks like, Chorazin. It's a Chorazin Plateau. Sermon on the Mount. It's a big mount right there. You know, there's a church there now. You can look it up. It's really pretty. I should have put a picture of it, didn't I? Nope. I did put my own picture of it. That's standing at the church. Those are banana fields. What do you call a banana something?
Tree.
Yeah, they're all banana trees, yeah. They are that. But inside of the banana things are banana trees. They keep them covered up, and it's really interesting. They'll have a different colored rag or bucket, whatever, on the outside of each of them to tell you when it's time to go back in that one. So you go down the road, they'll be yellow for a while, then these will be green, and you just need, not like actually, but blue, whatever. And then the other thing about Israel is this. So you have, this is so cool, you have huge date palm trees, right? They're tall. You've seen these, they're massive. So you drive down the road and it'll be tall, half as tall for like 2 or 3 trees back up. And then there'll be whole fields of the short ones. What they've done is they have created new date palm trees that are half the size that produce like half again as much. And so when one dies, they just replace it with one of these new ones. So it's like, goes along and it's But then all the fields, the new ones are, I thought they were just growing.
Yeah.
No, they stay that size. And so that's the other thing you see a lot of when you're there. When you're up here, you're looking down on the, I believe that's Capernaum, I believe it is. You're wrong about that one. Looking off and see just on the right-hand side, right here, that leads down to the river for the Sea of Galilee and makes a fantastic place also for the Sermon on the Plain. Do we know the difference, right? Sermon on the Mount is in Matthew. It says he goes up on the mountain and begins to teach. This is a mountain in the area. It's a perfect place for it. Who knows if it's the right one? There's no addresses, but this is an interesting place for it. Right beside it is a perfect amphitheater, where it says he went and got into a boat and sat just off the edge and began talking, right? Now, those two stories are very similar, but very different. If you read the Sermon on the Mount, it says, blessed are the poor in spirit, right? Luke says, blessed are the broke people. But the word's a little more complicated than that. But it begins with those who just are destitute, right? And then blessed are the others, but Luke is blessed are the hungry and the thirsty, and woe to you who are full, and all these. Two very different ones. Did he have two sermons that sounded similar? I don't know. Did his listeners to him get different things from him? I don't know. But it's interesting that when you stand in this place, you don't know if it's here or not, right? But you're there. And you start hearing stories. Sermon on the Plain, like, what was that? And you look it up. That's right here. Sermon on the Mount, how was that one different? It's right here. There's something about place that matters. And when you're in a place, and I'd like to hear that from you, what places exist in your faith that matter? Specific places. That heightens a story. What places in your faith matter? Tell us online. Drop it in.
Church.
Does the church matter to you? There's something about walking in the church. What about other church? Is there another church that when you walk into it, you get a different feeling as well? Like a home church, like where you're from? Something. So that makes that connection, right? Something's happened in that place. You start putting meanings and attachments to those meanings and identity to it even. Yeah.
I mean, I think nature, just walking out, looking at the sky, I mean, kind of the same as looking at the Sermon on the Mount and know that Jesus stood there looking at the stars and knowing that God spoke them into existence. And they don't look that much different than what Adam and Eve saw.
Right.
And it just, it's awesome.
What is it about nature that becomes so important to faith? Why nature? Because that's just almost universal, right? Like you can go through denominations and faith traditions and find that all over the place. What is it about nature that draws us in like that? As a place?
Because the things that he made are so perfect for what he wanted them to do or to be. There's certain creatures that have all these eyes and they need those eyes to survive, or they have different attributes.
So you see uniqueness in things.
Yeah, each thing is very unique, and when you look at it, even something very ordinary. You look at a hummingbird. You look at a hummingbird really close. They're unbelievable. They're in front of you. How they can stay up with that vibrating that they do, that little noise that they make, the little squeaky thing they do.
I hear awe in both of these as well.
Huh?
I hear awe in both of these. There's an awe to nature.
Yes.
We can't do that.
No, we can't.
Humans didn't do that.
Didn't do that. I think there's also a beautiful part of that of we recognize that all of nature is redeemed. Like there is something about nature that reminds us how good it can be, and not how bad. That the pristine forest is called pristine. It's like that becomes that. Wow, that's back to how it was. That's the autograph. To a degree, I think, and I think that's beautiful because we recognize that place and the things that we can touch and experience are good. So often we talk about the world being evil or bad. Have you seen it? And so you're standing on a hill. Is that the place? I don't know. But I know that story. And it gains some of those attachments and those feelings. And to me, that's one of the reasons why we have to keep a hold of, and God said it was good, rather than so often hearing how bad the world can be. Now, I'll use the world of sermons. We're talking about worldview then, right? But the creation? So, any questions about, or thoughts about Sermon on the Plain, Sermon on the Mount? Ooh. This is something we do have to touch. This is what you looked up. Would somebody read, all right, so now we're talking about Chorazin, we're talking about Capernaum, this area, right? Just on the north side of the Sea of Galilee. Would someone read us Matthew 11, 20 through 24? This is your thing, dude. So this is his home base, right? This is his people's. This is where he's from. Not exactly, he's from Nazareth, but this is where he's come back to start his ministry. And now he's drifted off to Tyre and Sidon, come back into this thing, preaching again, and back home, and Matthew 11 becomes very important to the story. 20 through 24, please. But then you add verses.
Then Jesus began to denounce the cities in which most of his miracles had been performed, because they did not repent. I am reading.
Yeah, you're right on it. 20 through 24.
Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! The miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon. They would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable for Tyre and Sidon on the day of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be lifted up to the skies? No, you will go down to the depths. If the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Sodom, it would have remained to this day. But I tell you that it will be more bearable for Sodom on the day of judgment.
I don't know if y'all know what happened to Sodom or not, but that didn't go well for them. That was a bad situation that they had to deal with the whole, I think, fire, brimstone raining down, all that kind of stuff. And like, that's cupcakes to what y'all gonna deal with. By the way, Rome could make it cupcakes. They were good at that. They could make it worse. So there's that. But again, we're talking about here's where he's from. Up here is Tyre and Sidon. That's Gentile land. That's not Jewish land. He said, if I did with the Gentiles up there on the beach where I go on vacation, you weren't here for that last week, but they went up there once, they were like, we gotta get away, we want the beach. They went up there and talking and somebody has to interrupt them. That's 100% what happened in that story as far as I'm concerned. But if I did what I was doing up there, they love me. And they repent and they follow me. Right? But you all will not. You all, what was it he said? Yes, they believe. Yes, they've seen the miracles. They have come in droves to see the miracles. They have believed that the miracles will happen. The problem wasn't their belief in the miracles. The problem is they wouldn't repent and let the change happen to their worldview. Right? That's what's happening in Capernaum and Chorazin and all these areas. They were coming in droves to be there with Jesus for the healings and for all these kind of things. And he's like, no. They wouldn't repent and believe what Christ was selling. Not selling, but you don't get that. Right? It is for free. He's giving away. And so, and in this, there's this thing it's bad to be blind to something, not be able to see something, right? That's a sad thing already. But to have your eyes opened by miracles and then choose still not to be changed in how you see the world, that's heartbreaking. They were right there. They were watching people get healed. People were getting dropped through ceilings, and he was like, stand up, and the guy that they've known all their life stood up and walked off, right? So that's the call in that he calls out his own people. And so even while he's building up people from this area, every time, from this area, he can't stay, right? It's getting, even there is getting untenable. And his mission wasn't there anyway. But it's almost like one of those things is, you know, preacher's got to know when it's time to go. He knew it was time to go. And off he went. Yeah, that's looking off. How gorgeous is that? Sermon on the Mount area, probably. And Sermon on the Plain. See the amphitheater? Both of them, same place. This is in Corazon. I'm not saying that the name right, but nobody's watching that cares. So, what's the joke? Did you just call up and get a table for 26? We're going to use half of it, right? So you have everybody sitting on one. Chewy's like, that's the dumbest joke you've ever heard. But you laughed. Who was it that painted it like that? Was that
Da Vinci.
Da Vinci? Was that who it was? I'm not a classic.
Maybe
I think it was Michael. Huh? It was Michelangelo. wasn't
It was one of those guys.
it? Or Rembrandt.
One of those guys that painted them.
I don't know. I don't make things like this stuff.
Now you know.
Yeah, somebody do. I don't have to paint that.
Was it fancy?
Is that the one in the Sistine Chapel?
We're embarrassing
Because
ourselves.
if it was, it's Michelangelo.
I don't think it's in this thing though, is it? Maybe it is.
You find that in painted that.
Table 26. Yeah.
Not an art history person.
Yeah, no, I'm not either.
So how long was that painted?
Leonardo da Vinci.
Is that Da Vinci? Okay, good call. So it wasn't necessarily wrong, it's just how you paint the way it was.
Yeah.
So, do you see the U shape that happens right here? Like this? You have a little middle section, right? That. And so if you were able to serve that table that was sitting, not a table, you sit on the floor. Sitting like this, see the little pathway that walks in, and you can sit in and you can set stuff at the U-shaped table. Everybody sat, left hand kicked back, leaning back against somebody. Very terrible way to eat. But that's how everybody kind of leaned up on each other. So, Jesus is in the center in the painting, right? Would somebody read Matthew 13:1? We're going to go to 26. Let me read this if I can. I may have to stop at this time for this one. Is Matthew Old Testament, New Testament?
Come on now, please.
Thanks, Jay, on yours. That was the long-standing joke in the seminaries. Anybody said something with the Bible, is that New Testament or Old Testament? I mean, like, you couldn't get the question out with somebody saying that exact thing. So stupid. So perfect, though. What were you saying? I'm sorry.
I was like, I guessed it was in the 80s.
Got it.
I just was throwing that out there.
I'm in 1084, you're on the wrong page. I think so. I just don't want to read the whole thing. I got here what I want to read. Oh. This is not where I want to be. Somebody tell me where. It's got to be John. It's got to be John. It's got to be John. It is. All right. John 13. That's what I meant to say. So it was just before the Passover feast. Jesus knew at that time had come for him to leave the world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he now showed them the full extent of his love. I love this. The evening meal was being served, and the devil had already prompted Judas Iscariot, son of Simon, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. You know, in John, Jesus knows everything. At Mark, there's always question marks in Mark, not John. John, Jesus knows everything. Jesus knew. Yeah. And so he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around it. Leaders don't do this for service. Service is for leaders. This was just a crazy talk. He came to Simon Peter. Lord, you gonna wash my feet? Jesus replied, you don't realize what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. They go back and forth, right? I want to call you down to verse 18. I'm not referring to all of you. I know those I have chosen, but this is to fulfill the scripture. This is about someone who's going to betray him. He who shares my bread has lifted up his heel against me. I'm telling you now before it happens, so that when it does happen, you'll believe that I am he. I tell you the truth. Whoever accepts anyone I send accepts me, and whoever accepts me accepts the one who sent me. After he said this, Jesus had trouble in spirit and testified, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. His disciples started staring at each other at a loss to know what it meant. One of them, whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. So Jesus and John are beside each other. If John is the disciple Jesus loved. Right? Where am I?
24.
And also, we recognize that John was the host. And I'm not sure where I can find that, but recognize that John is the host. Leaning back against him, he asked him, Lord, who is it? And Jesus answers, the one I will give this piece of bread when I have dipped it in the dish. Then dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, who would have been behind him, who he's leaning on, because you go around the table. And so from the story, we know we have John leading the way, Jesus, second spot, table, place of honor, second, and then Judas Iscariot, third. From just the mathematics of this one. Then, when he took the bread, Satan entered it. Where is it? Somewhere in here, and I missed it now. Peter starts listening over to who it is. And it says he leans across the table. I can't find it now. You can find it before me. But it says Peter, so there's talking, and he leans across to hear what's going on, which means he was at the other end of the table. So from the picture, somebody find it. I think it's in that one, maybe one of the other stories. I think it's in that one. So if that's the case, you have a Jesus, or a John, who sits right here first. Jesus sits in that second. Judas are third, and Peter over here. And so you can see from just the way the table is set in that story how it all kind of works. And so as you're hearing food, they're passing it around the circle, and you hear the passing from John to Jesus. You hear from who he is going to place, and he gives it to Judas. You have Peter listening across the table there, and just kind of seeing that, it just makes you wonder, what are conversations they were having? Like, what else they talk about? I know what they talk about other times, like who's the greatest? You know, was that what was happening in the back row back there? Who knows? By the way, this guy right here and I, we both got very sick the first day in the bus, and so we rode the front together the whole time. It was cool. We shared a seat. Nobody else had to share seats but us. Anyway, that was a cool picture. This wasn't in Nazareth. This was elsewhere, so not the same woman. Anybody want to know what that is? "35 synagogues have been found in Galilee. That's the only Moses seat that they dug up. Moses' seat is where they delivered the message from when you went to the synagogue. Would somebody read Luke 4 through 14 through 22? 4:14 through 22. This one wasn't in Nazareth, so that's not what they're saying.
Then Jesus, filled with the power of the Spirit, returned to Galilee, and a report about him spread throughout all the surrounding country. He began to teach in their synagogues and was praised by everyone. When he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was given to him. He unrolled the scroll and found the place where it was written, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." And as he rolled up the scroll, gave it back to the attendant, and sat down. The eyes of all in the synagogue were fixed on him. Then he began to say to them, "Today this scripture has been fulfilled in your hearing." All spoke well of him and were amazed at the gracious words that came from his mouth. They said, "Is not this Joseph's son?"
Yeah, so as he's sitting in Moses' seat, very likely, he sat down, probably in a seat very much like the back would have been better. He just been broke off. And I'm sure it was padding. But he sits down and begins to teach out of Moses' seat, the place where you gave, you know. How did he know what day to come? Did he just pick that out of Isaiah? Did he call for Isaiah?
Did they prescribe readings like we do?
Yes.
Exactly. They prescribed readings off of the year, right? At a certain time of the year, you got to this Isaiah piece that he referenced in this one. And so he just stood up, right? I'll preach Sunday. I got something to say. Whatever. Came in, and he was given the honor to do it. And was given the scroll of Isaiah. He knew where to turn to find the scripture, and he said, was he trained? I don't know. Could he read? I guess. Seems like it. Nobody else of his family would have been able to, but maybe he went to school. I don't know. Maybe that's part of the divinity. I don't know. Doesn't matter. The point is that he comes in, he reads that section, he knows what he's going to read, and he sits down in Moses' seat to teach. That's what a rabbi does. That's what a teacher does. He's teaching everywhere in this area. He's doing these miracles, and he's going all over the place, but in a way, he's being chased place to place, right? In this little area, being moved place to place. It says sometimes I got to get out here and go out in the wilderness. I got to go do this, I got to do that, because there's a little anxiety with wherever he is. This is interesting. You might know what this is? Guesses?
Is it a tomb?
No. It's actually right the opposite. It's a ritual bath.
Purification?
Yeah, it was for purification in the city, and it has an enter and exit on the other side. Why has it got an entrance and an exit? Sure, it's not that busy.
Because you're
Come in one
dirty
side,
on one
come
side
out.
and clean on the
That's right, I can't risk getting dirty again. I just stepped on that with my ugliness. Right.
You want to get dirty on the way out.
So we're sitting there at the western wall. I don't have a picture of it. And I look down, and there's a cup with two handles on it. Just a cup with two handles. And I sat there for a minute thinking, is it in case somebody said, no, you wash one, and then you wash with the other one. For the same reason. Like, that would have made a lot more sense if I thought about it for another 15 seconds maybe. But for the same reason, because I grabbed one handle with my dirty wash. Now that's clean, ritually clean. Then I take the other handle and wash, and now we're good. Right? The ritual cleanliness was, you have the sacred and you have the profane in this world. If you go to a dealership and you walk down through the cars that you're going to look at, and you see somebody up ahead scratch a car, you're like, man, I would like to do that. But you don't think about it much longer, right? Let that be your car. That's the sacred and the profane, right? Another example of what it was, a kid walking through a clothing store and they raked their ice cream across a pair of jeans, right? But if you were about to buy those jeans, it's a different story. And so you have the sacred, you have the profane. The sacred are those things that are reserved for good, holiness, and God. The profane are other stuff, right? And in a culture that takes that seriously, because we're going to get into this next week, but because you're supposed to stay in your lane in this world. It's not about personal achievement. None of that matters in this world. It's about staying within your kin group and playing by the rules and these sorts of things, right? And this process is part of maintaining our cleanliness. That doesn't mean you don't deal in the profane. You will. You got to bury somebody, don't you? That's profane. You got to do some things that are not, but there's this process that we use to bring us back into the fold, right? And it's a prescribed process. It's part of it's part of the religion. It's part of the culture. It's part of how you identify who you are, right?
That's because it's all about the law.
Well, and it's all about, and the law, I'll argue, is not inherently bad.
No, it's not.
Jesus
But they
followed
made-
the law.
But they made provisions in the law for those situations. When you bury
Exactly.
somebody, when you have to do something else, when you have leprosy, you have to stay outside of the village, the priest look at you, see if you can come back in. They had that all written out and figured out.
And Jesus did that. Remember, at one point, he went and did something that was unclean, and it said he could not enter any towns after that? It wasn't because they wouldn't let him in, it was because he was unclean. So even he's following these traditions because it's part of how the culture is designed to make sure that we're all participating in a manner that keeps us stable, right? And so this is part of how that happens. So you have Mark 1 through 4. Tell me the challenge of this one. Somebody read Mark 1 through 4 if you would. You gotta read this one in the spirit, though. Mark hits hard from the get-go. Mark 1 through 4, if somebody would. All right, I'll get ready for the next one. I gotta read it. The beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. That's the title of the book, by the way. The beginning of the gospel about Jesus Christ, the Son of God. It is written in Isaiah the prophet, I will send my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way, a voice of one calling in the desert, prepare the way of the Lord, make straight paths for him. And so John came, baptizing in the desert region and preaching a baptism of repentance for the forgiveness of sins. So there is a system set up to do this. If something happens and you're outside the system, we bring you back in the system by you going through this thing and having the cleanliness and ... But you have John the Baptist out in the wilderness baptizing people for the forgiveness of sins. What's the issue there? Problem with that? Why would anybody have a problem with this?
Was the wilderness considered clean? Did they release the scapegoats out into the wilderness?
It's not an easy place to stay clean, is it? I'll give you that one. that's not where the rules are made. That's not where, whose authority has he got? Stay in your lane. You are nothing but a preacher's kid from the hill country. Who said you get to do this? And he's creating a new movement of people by saying, oh, you ain't into that. Come. You're part of this. I can see why there's a huge problem with that, right? Massive problem with this. And so, rather than going through the purifying baths, they're going to the Jordan River and being part of a movement that's existing out here. In an area that I always agree with you, not easy to stay ritually clean out in the middle of the desert. I'll give you that one too. All right, so that's another place that Jesus was. We're going to go look at one more. We looked at. Never mind that picture. Probably have to look at that. Yeah. So we've looked at Capernaum on this side, Chorazin on this side, this area so far. There's a city there, so when the road gets to Magdala, it kind of splits, and you can go to Tiberias, or you can go to Capernaum when you start heading into that Galilee area, the Sea of Galilee area. Tiberias was built on a graveyard, and there was other idolatry stuff there, and so it's unclean. Jesus can't settle there, right? And so he takes the left way and goes to Capernaum. Up on the north side is Chorazin, and there's all these different, the towns north of there. But, and then there's Caesarea Philippi on up. But there's not much room on the eastern side, on this side of Sea of Galilee, on this side. There's not much room there because you get into a set of mountains and then it's stuff on the other side, right? So it's a challenge. There's only one city on that side that, of the Decapolis. We'll talk about what the Decapolis is in a second. There's only one of them, and it's this city. I can't remember what it was called in the Bible. S-C-Y-C-H. I'm blanking all of a sudden. No. It's spelled B-E-I-T space S-H-E-A-N now. Sikada, I'm blanking. But it was one of 10 cities that were east of the Sea of Galilee called the Decapolis. And those 10 cities basically could run themselves, more or less. They could do just whatever, as long as they paid tribute. But they weren't really under anybody's leadership other than their own, as long as they did what Rome wanted to do. The other 9 cities of this are, like I said, over the mountain and on over. If Jesus was going to go to Capernaum and he's going to go south of Jerusalem, he's not going to go way over on the other side of the mountains and come back. There's just no reason to. And so of the 10 cities, this is the one that makes sense that Jesus would have gone to. So there's some typical stuff here. Do you see how there's a street this way with the 2 sets of columns? And then over there's a street this way? That's how most of them were set up. Most of the Roman cities were. And that middle one could take chariots, dude. Like, it was massive. And I can't imagine how loud it would have been when the legion or the centurions came through. I just can't even contemplate how loud it would have been. But this is the city that so what happened was, I think this is the place that they were going to try to build a hotel and realize they just got to find a city. I think this is one of those places. But basically, anywhere you try to dig a hole, you're going to find something of importance. And they found this. They're part of the left side. They're continuing to do archaeological work on. And what you realize is that they didn't start really doing archaeological work until the 50s in Israel. Because you got to think, prior to that, there weren't a lot of stuff when you were in World War II before that, World War I not long before that, not a lot of kind of stuff was done. 1947, the British Mandate for Israel. 1948, they get independence. First thing you do is what? First thing you do is get the water running. right? And electricity on it, and infrastructure, and these sorts of things. And as you're doing that, you start finding stuff like, I can't feel anything there. And you start adding them up, and before long, now you start got everything else, you can start doing excavating and doing archaeological work. In other words, they're still finding stuff all the time. All the time they're still finding things, and that's why the pavilions over there, they're doing work right there now, because they found some more stuff they gotta look at. Along that road, in the middle of the road, on the outside, you see those paved areas. They would have had roofs over them, and then walls on the backside, and that's the marketplaces. So you go down through there, you do whatever you want to, you go back into the other areas where you live, and then we'll see some other stuff about it. Or you go watch a show. This is just so sick. So, this went all the way up previously to where I almost went higher than this, until there was a big earthquake and it knocked the whole thing down except for the front. But this part of it just kind of slid down. And so they were able to restore it, and this was an amphitheater in this town with the Decapolis. I can't think of the name of it. You see the front row where people could previously sit? That was for the dignitaries. If it doesn't have that front row, that means that lions fought there, because nobody sits that low. It's not a true story. But in this one, you have where the dignitaries would sit along the bottom. And the lower you sat, the more important you were. Here's the stage. This is the front of the stage, right? And so the rest of it's that direction. Behind that wall, let's see if we can see it. Well, it's over here on the right, you can't see it. Behind those columns would have been a huge wall that blocked off all of the marketplace on the other side, right? The columns would have been that one and then another one right on top of it. That's how big it would have been. And so it creates a backdrop, so when you're watching the show, you're not looking out the back, watching people shopping in the marketplace, right? And it creates just this, y'all, they still have shows there. Can you imagine getting to listen to a concert in that place? So when you go there was a choir group that started singing. I don't know what, How Great Is Our God, or whatever. I wanted them to sing something different, I remember that. But I also remember the sound just being amazing. It just gets in there and bounces. It's beautiful. Anybody got any clue what this one is? This is underneath that. Anybody got any idea what this one is? This is fun. It's a sauna. Get this. You can see where these would be higher, but you can see where the floor came across, right? So you have that space below it. You have hot water that you boil somewhere else. You pump it through underneath. It gets the floor hot. You throw water on it. It creates steam. The roof was domed, so when the steam goes up, it hits, runs down the wall, and comes back in. It channels on each side and goes right back underneath to do it again. How brilliant, right? And so this was part of the life in these cities. It was baths, it was it was the huge amphitheaters, it was the marketplace, and it was all packed, tied in together, right? And Jesus comes in, and this happens. Would someone read Mark 5, 1 through 17? Y'all hit me with this one. This is an important piece of scripture.
Jesus heals the demoniac.
Yep.
They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of, I should have seen what names were in here.
Make stuff up, dude. It doesn't matter.
Jezerenes. And when he had stepped out of the boat, immediately a man out of the tombs with an unclean spirit met him. He lived among the tombs, and no one could restrain him anymore, even with a chain.
Okay, let's stop there for just a second. Unclean spirit, right? That doesn't mean that just his spirit's unclean. That means he's unclean, right? Those body and spirit are not separated. They're all tied up together in this. So he's in And he's in the graveyard. There is nothing, well, maybe one or two things more unclean than that for purity laws, but I can't think of what they'd be. Unclean as can be, and he's unrestrainable. Do you remember how many times Paul talked about restraining feelings? He's always talking about that, right? Always about restraining. Paul's always about that. It's because there was a whole train of thought that existed about how to restrain one's feelings. This is the opposite of that. Dude can't restrain anything. Right? Go ahead if you would.
For he had often been restrained with shackles and chains, but the chains he wrenched apart, and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always howling and bruising himself with the stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and bowed down before him, and he shouted at the top of his voice, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God not to torment me." For he had said to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." I wish I could do the reverberation thing. It sounded like a crowd.
That's
I said,
right.
"We are Legion."
Well, yeah, that'd be great, wouldn't it? Well, can you use it, please? Let's stop right there. What's a legion?
Is that-
5,000?
I don't know the number, but what do you mean?
5,000 soldiers.
Soldiers. There is one meaning for legion. Only one meaning in the entire world at this time for legion. It was a Roman infantry unit.
Garrison, yeah.
Right, that's what it was. That's it. And he's in a Gentile city. If you would keep reading, please, thanks.
My name is Legion, for we are many. He begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now there on the hillside a great herd of swine was feeding, and the unclean spirits begged him, "Send us into the swine, let us enter them." So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea.
Anybody ever done anything with hogs?
We had a few on the farm.
You did? How much meat did you get out of a hog?
Quite a bit.
How about 2,000?
Yeah, I can't imagine.
2,000 hogs. 2,000 of them. What in the world is somebody doing with 2,000 pigs? Named Legion, with a demon named Legion around. Roman garrison. Roman pigs, man. Jews didn't eat pigs. Decapolis is a Jewish area, it was a Gentile area. But it's 2,000 pigs. Right? It's a lot of people. And this is a big town. But it was named Legion. There's a lot of play in this thing that's happening that is specifically an anti-Roman Empire statement in this. That's part of this story. Not the whole story, but it's part of the story. Now, can you continue reading this, talk about what happens in the Decapolis and what the people do? You ready for this one? This is the worst.
Yeah, and they were drowned in the sea. The swineherds ran off and told it in the city and in the country. Then people came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and saw the demoniac sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, the very man who had had the legion, and they were afraid. Those who had seen what had happened to the demoniac and to the swine reported it. Then they began to beg Jesus to leave their neighborhood. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed by demons begged him that he might be with Jesus. But Jesus refused and said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and what mercy he has shown you." And then he went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed.
How heartbreaking is it that they're like, Jesus, you gotta go. You caused us too many problems. You gotta get out of here. And that was in this city. In fact, it was actually people who walked on that bottom road right there. That's the original Mosaic road that runs through the middle of the city. But apparently, the Byzantines who came in afterwards didn't like it so much they put white marble on top of it. That's what the second layer is. Can you imagine? That is the gorgeous flooring that is there, and they're like, now like it, let's go marble on top of it. That's like if you have a house with hardwood floors and somebody carpets it. You open it up, you're like, what? This is here? It's sort of the same thing. So they left it like that to see how civilizations build on top of each other. But this road right here was the road where those folks walked that were like, Jesus, you gotta get out of here, you cause us problems. Cause problems with who?
The pocketbook.
The pocketbook. Yeah, probably the Roman government. Yeah, probably the Roman government. The local dude didn't have they didn't have 2,000 pigs. This is big time. So an elite from the Roman government probably had it. And that's the Decapolis. That's the area they're talking about. And so Jesus does this loop around the Sea of Galilee, and it ain't far, man. It's like I said, he could go from Nazareth all the way to Capernaum in 8.5 hours of walking. I'll be there this afternoon. You know, I mean, you leave at 8, you're there by 4. If you don't talk, but they walk faster, like I said, they do. And so as he's here, he's sort of just being chased the whole time. You kind of see it. Never settled, he always said it, never had a home. Always there's this angst that's happening. And in the midst of that angst, in the midst of the chaos, he's pulling people together. And you ever seen the part in Rocky where Rocky goes on the run before he goes to fight Apollo Creed? You remember this scene? He runs off in the city, and first he's by himself, and then people start running with him, and before it's over with, he's doing the Rocky thing on top of the art. It's the art museum, isn't it?
Yeah.
Philadelphia. Philadelphia's got a statue. Their biggest statue is for somebody that's not even real. Cracks me up.
How big is that?
This cracks me up. But anyway, I kind of see it like that. He's coming around this area. He's gathering up people. He's working miracles and teaching and all that. And as it's going, it's just kind of gathering steam, because part of the steam is the chaotic nature of what's happening. People always want to go somewhere else. It just never gets settled. Which I think is sort of like me. We never get settled in our faith. We're always like, you ever been just really comfortable with your thing? Like everything's perfect with it right now? I know everything?
Never is.
So that's kind of the area. I just want to look at that. We'll look at the Jesus boat next week for just a minute to sail us away from the area. Y'all know about the Jesus boat? Have y'all heard about this? Go look it up before then. It's so cool. The lake is back up. The Sea of Galilee had dropped way out a few years ago. Like it got bad. And then good news is that the Israeli government or somebody, one of the Israelis, found out how to desalinate water really easy. And so they desalinate almost all the water they use now out of the Med. And they're pumping also water back into the Sea of Galilee, which is great, because it had fallen out. But when it did, a boat appeared in the shoreline. And somebody went and saw it and realized, they touched it, things just starts falling apart. You know, I gotta call somebody. So they get somebody out, they start working with it, and as they're working with it, they have to basically use their hands to brush away any dirt. And while they're doing it, you can see it's a crew of people who are using spray balls, just continually spraying this thing down. You can imagine how your hand would cramp, just like there'd really a big team of people doing that. Then they got that far, and they started pumping some kind of urethane around it, and dug it underneath it, so it went underneath it, and then they picked the whole thing up by a crane and stuck it on land, on wherever, and took it to a place and started just picking up this boat. And what they found out was it's from the turn of millennia. It's from Jesus' day, and it looks like the other boats that appeared in different descriptions and all this kind of stuff. And so they restored it. They have all the different kinds of pieces of wood in it. They just used whatever wood they could find to make this thing, right? And a mast, the whole bit. And then you realize if there were 12 dudes in that boat, Jesus didn't go to sleep anywhere because there's no room for 12 people. But But it's interesting to be able to see that very common boat, and they found it in the Sea of Galilee just a few years ago. So we'll look at it next week. And then what I want to talk about is, so we've kind of gotten the lay of the land now, sort of figured out where we are, but we've not gotten the lay of how people existed in the land. So next week we're going to talk about this way that they kept everything in balance, and it was called honor and shame. Shame is a good thing. If you're shameless, it's not good, right? So that's shame. That's not a good thing. Shame is one of those things, it's not like it just kind of keeps you acting like everybody thinks you ought to act. Well, that was huge in this culture. It's massive in this culture. So we're going to talk this idea of how honor and shame work together, and how it was about your family. What's the key characteristic in the United States about your identity? Key characteristic is what? How much money you got? Your economics. It's number one. That's how you define it. That was not the case then. It was who you're kin with and your relationship to your family. That was number one, bar none, in that day. And so those two differences are going to come to light next week as we look at what it means to live in that time. So I've done nothing but talk. Anybody got questions? I hope it's at least been interesting. Or I'll just keep talking. It doesn't matter. I'm paying to talk anyway. I don't get paid by the word, though. I realize that.
You know, Charles Dickens did get paid, which explains a lot.
Can you imagine covering that up, though? Oh, no big deal. The marble came from like Turkey or Egypt. One of the things that we kept walking around, and they would talk about different stones that they brought in and how much they weighed. These single-sized stones that they know didn't come from that area, and had to come from like 30 miles away or whatever it was. More than 2,000 years ago in some cases. And they have no clue how they did it, other than absolute mass manpower. Put it on rollers and see how many people we can get to pull it. I just can't even imagine. So
Did the Romans build these? This was built by the Greeks, weren't they? Wasn't it?
Some of this was built by the Romans.
Okay.
Now you had Greek stuff, but this specific part was built by the Romans. I didn't see Greek era stuff except one or two places, I think. But this was Roman era. But I mean, just can you imagine what's called workmanship to make a road like that?
So if it was the Romans, they had access to lots of labor.
Yeah.
They just.
Yeah. And that's how you got to be powerful, is you did big things in the name of Caesar, right? That we're going to do this massive thing to honor Caesar, and that's how you got money to build other things. And so the bigger you did stuff, the better it was. And so if I can get marble from Turkey and name it whatever city or whatever street in the name of Caesar, and I can get him down here next time and send me money for something else, and I get honor and I get a better place at the table. And envy was huge. We have jealousy. They had envy. Envy was, see, here's a big difference when you read the scripture. I'm done with this. I am. We live in a time of unlimited goods. We believe that when we gain something, there's an unlimited amount of things to gain, and so my gaining doesn't affect anybody else. Right? That's kind of our culture. Not totally, but that's one of the ways we think. This was a day that did not believe that way. 100% did not believe that way. They believed in limited goods. So if I got something, I was taking it away from somebody else. And if somebody else got something, they were taken away from me. So we are all in our clan groups, our kinship groups, right? And everybody's supposed to be acting within the way they're supposed to act. But then I have somebody over there who's making a move of doing things outside of what he should be able to do, right? He's getting some attention because he gave money to whoever the governor is in this area, whatever it is, right? As that's happening, especially amongst the elite like that, there becomes this power play of how do we now shame somebody else? So we have stories of this. Pharisees come to Jesus and they try to trick him. And Jesus flips it back on them, right? Well, what they were trying to do is prove to everybody else he didn't know what he was doing and shame him or dishonor him back into the fold, right? Mom and the brothers did the same thing. Dude, you got to get back in line. You got to get within the kin group. You got to this sort of thing. And that's how all of this existed in that day. And so, in the same way, envy becomes somebody else got this, and I am affected by it. And envy says, I want to displace them. Jealousy is, that car is nice. I should like to drive that thing. This envy was very different than that. It was trying to bring people down to lift yourself up, especially in groups. So that becomes very important as you read those stories. All right, let's pray. God, thank you for places. We ask that you make some place special to us this week. Allow us to be somewhere where something good happens, something important hits our mind, something strikes us, and we can identify with that place and that circumstance so that we exist there again and it reminds us of it again. And we thank you, God, that places matter to us. We ask that you release us from this place and keep it happy thoughts about it and good, it's the goodness that exists here. And bring us back here and let us worship together on Sunday and lift up your name and recognize that there is a very special place. And it's in the community of God, in the kingdom of God, wherever we exist and for all time. And that is what we want more than anything else. And God's people said, January of 25. We're going. I have decided. Follow Jesus. You know a story about following Jesus, don't you? I got lost with Jesus. Don't follow Jesus, he'll get you lost. You know the story? The last night I'm in France with my friends. I go with Jesus, at his family's house, which is the last stop on the, in the area, railway. In the middle of nowhere. And so we have a great dinner. We're eating cherries off the tree that's sitting. He crawled up in it, picked them, washed them. So anyway, we gotta leave, and we get to the train station. And there's like 75 people in the train station, all golf bags. There's a golfer, you know something, he's still not